Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to talk about something that was requested regarding how to increase wealth using psychological research, and all the research will be in the description box. Often, we talk on this channel a little bit more about clinical, developmental, social psychology. And today, we're going to focus a little bit more on motivational and the personality. So the psychology of personality. And that's kind of the aim of today's video. A lot of this does have some behavioral connotation or context, but a lot of it is we're going to use these psychological subconscious behaviors to kind of help individuals navigate their wealth and their desire to increase wealth. However, this does not replace structural solutions like raising income, budgeting, etc. And we'll talk about that throughout. But the very first one actually is something that I think is very helpful. We want to automate savings instead of rely on habits or self-control. And this research was done actually in 2018. And this was I believe it was not just psychology. It was also about economics and neuroscience. That was the journal. I think it was called the Journal of Neuroscience, Psychology, and Economics, all three of them, which was cool. And what that research found, the one in 2018, was that automatic savings actually reduce the reliance on self-control, but it also minimizes impulsive spending because automatically it's coming out of whatever paycheck or whatever setup you have. And the saving actually becomes not just habitual, but also something that is now to some extent out of your control. And so it's not going to be based on your mood or your emotion. It's something that's automatically happening. And this can actually show that it can build long-term wealth. And so an example that was kind of brought up a little bit in the research was actually to have automatic transfers from checkings to savings, or like a retirement account every paycheck, for example. And so it's basically not necessarily visible to you, if that makes sense. And that was very interesting because I think it does help a lot of people. And I think that this is something that people can do regardless of your income. And I'm not saying you have to do like a whole chunk of your income, even just a little bit, whatever percentage you like. I don't study finance or economics. So I'm not going to give you those perspectives, but from a psychological standpoint, this does allow you to feel less overwhelmed by the control aspect of it, which is very helpful, okay? The next one is something that I found extremely valuable, and I believe strongly about this, okay? Obviously, this is much more framed towards psychology. I have seen this a lot in session, just in general with my lifestyle, anybody's lifestyle, but there's research on it. Basically, we want to frame financial goals to match a particular patient's personality or your personality, right? Basically, we want to find a psychological goal that fits, okay? And this research was done in 2023. Basically, we want to tailor those goals to frame your personality to improve savings. And this was based on human behavior. People are more likely to actually stick to financial goals when those goals align with their personality. So for example, we don't even have to go with the 5 main personality traits that we see in psychology, the domains of personality. We don't even have to go that specific or that broad. All that we can do is based on how do you behave. Now, I'm going to give myself as an example. I tend to be a person that's very specific about certain things. So I like setting things up to where I have some control over it. So on Friday, I make sure I do certain things financially every Friday, regardless of whatever my payment strategies or how much money I have. I always like to do things a certain time period for me. Some people like doing it on a weekend. I know some people, they like to write out their budget. It's easier than using an app. Some people like to write it out or type it out. Some people like to handwrite it. Whatever your personality is, allow it to stick in your perspective. Some people, they get overwhelmed very easily or they struggle with impulsive types of spending. I don't struggle with that, but some people do. And what I've noticed from a psychological standpoint, if you're struggling with that, it's actually a lot easier for you to do a lot of things that are hands off. So automatically doing some things, which is the opposite of my strategy and my personality. I like seeing it. I like being the one doing it. It helps me to commit to my goals. And so that's just an example. What is your personality type? You can go ahead, your personality, right? Frame your goals based on the way you are. If you're more specific like I am, you might like what I'm doing. If you're a little bit more open to freedom and you're a little bit less concentrated on certain things or wanting a certain thing a certain way, it might be a little bit easier if it's all things are automated, okay? That's an example. The next one is actually we want to use the psychology of optimism, which I know a lot of people are a little bit concerned about or uncomfortable about because of how some people might frame it in a too optimistic way where it actually hurts that patient. But we want to frame a more positive financial future. We did see research, this was done in 2024, that people who are a little bit more optimistic about their financial position actually does tend to save more and are less likely to go in debt, which is very interesting. And the research actually shows that this technique is actually even more prominent with low income individuals, which I don't know how that fits in necessarily to your financial perspective, but I think that's very interesting because it does show that those who are more optimistic about their possibilities are more comfortable getting themselves out of that situation, okay? And I think that can also lead into why some people might take more risks financially or look for opportunities that they want because they already have that optimistic perspective, if that makes sense, okay? The next one is we want to actually strengthen self-control and we want to delay gratification, okay? This research was done in 2023 and we saw that low self-control is actually linked to higher consumer debt, which I think a lot of people can put those two together. But we also see it's also with lower savings, and particularly those who have more financial habits that what some people might consider a bit lacking of self-control, okay? People with more higher self-control tend to accumulate more assets over time. And unfortunately, there's a little bit of trauma involved, which it's my field of study, so that's going to come up. People who have a traumatic past, especially if they've had a background where there was a lot of poverty or a lot of control financially, sometimes what they do is they might want to push against that. And so they might have a lot of consumer debt or a lot of these behaviors because they're still battling with that trauma of not having certain things. So it's a scarcity mindset. They're afraid if they don't get this right now, it's going to affect them. And sometimes it's important to explore why you're struggling with self-control in certain areas and to not be so harsh on yourself if you cannot commit to certain things the way somebody else can, because they might have less trauma in that area that you have. And so be gentle with yourself. Please take care of yourself and your mental health. I think that's very important. Sometimes what patients can do that can help with these impulsive types of behaviors is take like a week off of not purchasing anything and see what happens next. Sometimes what happens is people might actually come up with, they might actually spend more afterwards because they feel that fear of not being able to spend. But what you will start seeing is if you start doing that continuously, that will start tapering off that impulse a little bit, depending on who you are, who your therapist is, what you're working with in terms of this particular behavior. But there are a lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma with the self-control and finances. I'm not going to go too much in depth to it, but explore that on your own time. I might make a separate video on financial trauma actually at one point, because I'm realizing there's like a lot to cover with that particular topic. But this one strategy I mentioned, that's a good one, but it really depends because that might not help everybody. Okay. So be careful about that. Okay. The next one is actually improving financial literacy can very much help. And it can actually challenge some of those limiting beliefs regarding money, or sometimes might even be some maladaptive thoughts and beliefs. Okay. This is in general, even with relationships that are toxic or unhealthy or whatever terminology you want to call it, being a little bit more psychologically literate can really help you to get yourself out of certain situations. It's the same with finances, right? I actually used two different research to kind of get some of the information. I thought it was really interesting. This one of them was 2014, and this was basically just about financial literacy, but the one in 2013 was the psychology of money in general and those negative beliefs. And so I put them into one point, but there's two different separate research. So financial literacy actually does show, based on this research, it does show wealth accumulation independently of formal education. So it shows that a lot of these individuals, they use their understanding of finances and they diversify it in different ways, using different types of incomes. Actually, having diverse sources of income is a good example. Understanding how finances work and not just using it as a point by point type of strategy, but more like a blueprint for how they're going to approach financial situations in general, okay? And a lot of times by having more financial literacy, you're able to challenge those financial beliefs that are stopping you and limiting you, right? Some of those harmful beliefs, such as spending is bad, or some people might think using stocks are, a bad thing, or it's very risky. And having those thoughts, you might be right. I don't study finances. However, we're seeing that by understanding your perspective of money and challenging some things about it, you're able to subconsciously unravel those self-sabotaging behaviors, okay? It can be helpful to actually look into learning a little bit about finances. It can help, okay? The next one is some form of, I want to say like a behavioral, like a prompting behavior. Let me explain it and then we can kind of see how we want to summarize this point. I'm not really sure how to word it. Basically, the more simple the financial decision, the more you can simplify it, I guess is the best way to put it. So the point will be to simplify certain choices and behaviors. And so it's easier for you to not get overwhelmed. So when you simplify financial decisions, such as defaulting certain things or reducing any sort of emotional friction you have about saving, it can actually improve your financial prospects and perspective of your future financially. So I'm going to give an example because that's a lot and I understand. This research was done in 2022. So basically, simplifying finances in general can help people to not be so overwhelmed. So some people use this type of strategy where they take everything in cash and they have a certain amount of cash for their groceries, a certain amount of cash for whatever it may be, mortgage, whatever it is, rent, or whatever your situation is, right? And you're able to see physically that amount that you're spending, and that simplifies it. You don't need to go through like 20 different apps or this, credit card app or whatever it is. You're not looking into so many different things. You have simplified it so that you can get more comfortable with finance in general. And once you're able to continue that structure, maybe you can start leveraging into other ways that might be a little bit more easier for you after you've been more comfortable with that. So maybe elevate that a little bit more depending on your personality. That's just an example. Basically, in short, simplifying finances for you and your family can be very beneficial to increase your income, okay? The next one is, I'm going to try and explain the word. Basically, we want to make spending a little bit less accessible, okay? Kind of like some sort of mental accounting. So basically, the best way to put it is people typically subconsciously divide money into different psychological boxes, I guess, the way they have it in their mind, okay? And so understanding what your thoughts and how you've divided your money subconsciously and psychologically can help you to realize where your money is going. So an example could be a lot of people believe that if you have enough money left over after a certain amount of spending or whatever it is, all your bills are paid and you have extra money, this is used to buy whatever you want, right? Some people have that perspective. As long as I paid all my bills, I'm good. Other people believe me paying my bills is all that I need to think about. Any money afterwards automatically goes into savings, right? And so the way you divide your money in your mind can really show your behavior around money and challenging something like that. So what I mean by making spending more difficult is actually making these things less accessible to you, maybe only having one credit card instead of 5, right? And you want to make sure that limit is not too high and so you can manage it. Or you only, maybe you do have some high limit credit cards, whatever it is, but you only travel with one. You only carry that particular one that has the lowest limit, whatever it is. And so it creates a little bit of a barrier so you're not always needing to spend that money. That's a good example. Some people, it might even be, don't use credit cards, just stick to your debit card so you can only spend what you have in your bank. These are some examples, okay? The next one is tracking your progress can actually help psychologically. This research was done in 2021. Basically, tracking your progress sometimes once a week and just checking every single thing that you spent can actually help you subconsciously be more aware of what's going on with your money. And it also helps not just with monitoring. When you realize you're doing well, if you're tracking your debt and you're realizing you're putting a lot of money towards your debt and the debt amount is decreasing, that actually boosts motivation. It actually makes you want to keep going. It makes you want to continue this, okay? The next one is we don't want to have an over reliance on rewards. We don't want that motivation crowding, okay? So we don't want any sort of external, I want to say, we don't want incentives. That's the word I'm looking for. We don't want like incentives to drag you into spending. The first example I thought about was like cash rewards on credit cards. If you spend a certain amount, maybe you get 5% this quarter, whatever it is. Let's say if you're buying electronics or something, right? Whatever it is. And sometimes people use that as a means to spend money. And instead, what you can look at it is, instead of always relying on those incentives, you can try and find other ways to manage your motivation. So for example, like we were talking about earlier, tracking and seeing that your debt is going down. Sometimes what it can also help is looking at how much money you have, left over after a certain point, and you want to put it to certain accounts, retirement accounts, whatever it may be. Or what can sometimes help is if you mentally tell yourself you're saving for a particular thing. And so you're not focusing necessarily on incentives, but your goal is motivated towards something else. So an example could be wanting to save for a house, a down payment, a new car, redoing your bathroom. These are ways to reduce that over reliance on rewards and continue to stay more goal oriented, okay? That research also was 2021. Sorry, I don't know if I said that. The next one is, in general, being a little bit less hard on yourself. I don't know how to say that. Basically, if you make mistakes, and you can see this also with dieting and eating and things like that, when you make a mistake, don't have a black or white type of mindset. You don't want an all or nothing. If you mess up and spend a little more than you wanted to, that's okay. Just the next day, go right back to where you were, instead of completely starting your budget over or believing you can't handle it. These things take time. And every single person in this world, we struggle a little bit with motivation. We struggle with self-control. We struggle with our own issues, external factors that we're not expecting. I don't know, maybe your HVAC system doesn't work anymore, and maybe it's hot outside and whatever it is. And now you have to spend $15K to repair it, or whatever amount it is in your area, right? And so you're going to have to sometimes roll with whatever's occurring in your life, and that's okay. I just wanted to let you know that those are some of the things that can help you psychologically to maybe put yourself in a better or elevated financial position, okay? I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.